Number 5. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. April 20th, 1999. Littleton, Colorado. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary morning that starts like every other. Students filed into Columbine High School, backpacks slung over shoulders, plans for the weekend already forming in their heads. No one noticed the two seniors walking in just before noon. No one noticed the bags they were carrying. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had been planning this for over a year. In journals and home videos later recovered by investigators, they described what they called their final solution, a calculated act of rage, aimed not just at the school, but at the world. And yet, to their teachers, their neighbors, even their own parents, they appeared almost normal. A little withdrawn, maybe, but normal. At 11:19 a.m., the shooting began in the school cafeteria and quickly spread through the hallways. For nearly an hour, law enforcement outside the building waited for backup while chaos unfolded inside. Students hid under desks, barricaded doors, and called 911 from inside locked classrooms. One librarian lay perfectly still in whispered prayers. 13 people, 12 students, and one teacher lost their lives that day. The investigation that followed shook the nation to its core. Investigators discovered that Harris and Klebold had been bullied, yes, but had also bullied others. They had shown warning signs, a web page, a journal filled with violent fantasy, a failed background check attempt on a gun purchase that somehow slipped through, a parent who found a sawed-off shotgun barrel and didn't report it. The question the country couldn't stop asking wasn't just how, it was why. Why weren't the signs taken more seriously? Why were the killers able to stockpile weapons in their own homes? And perhaps most chillingly, how many other Eric Harrises are out there right now, quietly planning in the silence of their bedrooms? Columbine changed American schools forever. It sparked the era of active shooter drills, metal detectors, and see something, say something campaigns. The trauma rippled outward, through the survivors, through the parents, through an entire generation that suddenly understood that no place was truly safe. But here's what keeps investigators and psychologists up at night. In the years since Columbine, the shooting has been studied, obsessed over, and, disturbingly, idolized by future mass shooters. It didn't end the conversation. In many ways, it started one we still haven't finished. Number 4. Timothy McVeigh, April 19th, 1995. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. At 9:02 in the morning, the earth shook. A massive explosion tore through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, collapsing an entire face of the 9-story structure. Glass shattered for blocks in every direction. Car alarms screamed. And then came the silence. That terrible, suspended silence before the screaming began. 168 people died. Among them, 19 children who'd been dropped off at the building's daycare center just minutes before. In the immediate aftermath, investigators scrambled for answers. Early speculation pointed overseas toward foreign terrorist groups. The idea that an American citizen could carry out something on this scale seemed almost incomprehensible. But the truth, as it turned out, was far closer to home. Timothy McVeigh was a decorated Gulf War veteran, clean-cut, methodical. He had shaken hands with generals. He was the last person most people would look at and think threat. And yet, beneath the surface, he had spent years consumed by a growing hatred of the federal government, fueled by the 1993 siege at Waco, Texas, and the 1992 standoff at Ruby Ridge. He believed he was a patriot. He believed he was at war. McVeigh was arrested just 90 minutes after the bombing, not because of any sophisticated investigation, but because a state trooper pulled him over for driving without a license plate. In his pocket, a knife. On his shirt, a quote from Abraham Lincoln about watering the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants. The investigation revealed meticulous planning, a rented truck, thousands of pounds of fertilizer-based explosive, a getaway car hidden nearby. McVeigh had studied the building's blueprints. He had chosen the morning of April 19th deliberately, the second anniversary of the Waco fire. He had no remorse. In a final statement before his execution in 2001, he called the 19 children killed in the blast collateral damage. The Oklahoma City bombing forced America to confront a terrifying new reality that domestic terrorism, born of homegrown ideology, was just as deadly as any foreign threat. It reshaped federal security, it changed how law enforcement monitors extremist groups, and it left a scar in the heartland that never fully healed. But the question that lingers, that must linger, is this: McVeigh didn't act entirely alone. His co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, was convicted, but investigators always believed there was a third person involved, someone who was never caught, someone who may still be out there.
Number 3. Stephen Paddock, October 1st, 2017, Las Vegas, Nevada. 32 floors above the Las Vegas Strip, a 64-year-old retired accountant stood at the broken windows of his hotel suite at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. Below him, 22,000 people enjoyed the final night of a country music festival. The headliner was just taking the stage. At 10:05 p.m., Stephen Paddock opened fire. For 10 minutes, 10 unrelenting, terrifying minutes, he unleashed a barrage of gunfire onto the helpless crowd below. 60 people were killed. More than 400 were wounded by gunfire. Over 800 more were injured in the chaos that followed. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in American history. What made Paddock different, what made this case uniquely, deeply disturbing, was how utterly ordinary he appeared. He was wealthy, he traveled frequently, he gambled at high-stakes video poker. He had no criminal record, no known history of violence, no documented mental illness. His girlfriend said she had no idea what he was planning. His brothers said he was not an avid gun guy. And yet, when investigators entered room 32135, they found 23 weapons, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, cameras set up in the hallway and on a room service cart outside his door so he could monitor for approaching law enforcement. The planning was extensive, methodical, cold. And then, silence. No manifesto, no clear motive. Investigators from the FBI and Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department spent years combing through Paddock's life, finances, communications, and travel history. They interviewed hundreds of people. They followed every lead. They never found a why. In 2019, investigators officially closed the case without establishing a motive. That conclusion, that the deadliest mass shooting in American history may simply have no explanation, is perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. We are wired to want reasons. Reasons help us make sense of the world. Reasons help us believe we can prevent what comes next. Stephen Paddock offered none. And somewhere in that silence, a question remains open. Was there something we missed? Or is that the real horror? That sometimes evil has no explanation at all.
Number 2. Jim Jones, November 18th, 1978. A remote jungle clearing in Guyana, South America. More than 900 Americans, men, women, and children, lay dead. It was, at the time, the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11th, 2001. Jim Jones was a preacher, charismatic, passionate, and, in his early years, genuinely progressive. He founded the People's Temple in Indianapolis in the 1950s, promoting racial equality, healing, and community at a time when those words carried real danger.
His followers were drawn from the margins of society, the poor, the disillusioned, the searching. He gave them belonging, he gave them purpose, and slowly, quietly, he gave them a God, himself. By the mid-1970s, the People's Temple had grown to thousands of members across California, but so had the warnings. Defectors who escaped described beatings, financial exploitation, and psychological control so total that members cut ties with their own families. Investigative journalists began asking questions. Government officials began asking questions. So, Jones moved his flock to the jungle. He called it Jonestown. He called it a socialist paradise. In reality, it was a compound, isolated, controlled, and increasingly paranoid. Members worked exhausting hours. They slept in shifts. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. And each night, over loudspeakers, Jones delivered rambling sermons about enemies closing in from every direction. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown to investigate reports of abuse. He brought journalists, he brought family members desperate to see their loved ones. And for a brief moment, it seemed like the outside world had finally arrived. Then, as Ryan's delegation attempted to leave with a group of defectors, gunmen opened fire at the nearby airstrip. Congressman Ryan was killed. An NBC News crew was killed. The world would learn what happened next from the audio recordings left behind, recordings of Jones telling his followers that the time had come. He called it revolutionary suicide. He handed out cups of punch laced with cyanide to the children first. Of the 918 who died, 304 were children. The Jonestown Massacre reshaped how the world thinks about cults, coercion, and the terrifying power of absolute devotion. And yet, the most haunting truth of all is this: most of the people who died in that jungle believed until the very end that Jim Jones loved them. Number 1. John D. Lee, September 11, 1857, Southern Utah Territory. A wagon train of more than 120 men, women, and children from Arkansas had been traveling the trail west for weeks. They were farmers, families, ordinary people with dreams of California and a new life. They called themselves the Baker Fancher Party. By the time they reached a quiet meadow in the mountains of Utah, they were tired, dusty, and ready to rest. They would never leave. What happened at Mountain Meadows is one of the darkest chapters in American frontier history, and one of the most deliberately buried. For years, the full truth was suppressed, distorted, and obscured. The men responsible were members of the Utah Territorial Militia, aligned with the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints during a period of intense religious and political conflict with the federal government known as the Utah War. The attack began with an ambush, initially carried out to look like a Native American raid. But when the immigrants held their ground and the siege stretched into days, the militia changed tactics. They sent in a flag of truce. They promised safety. They told the survivors that if they laid down their weapons and walked out in peace, they would be escorted to safety. The emigrants believed them. They laid down their weapons. They walked out with their children. And then the order was given. 120 men, women, and teenagers were killed in under 5 minutes. Only the youngest children, those deemed too young to remember, were spared and taken to local families. The bodies were left where they fell. The wagons were looted. And for years, the full scope of what happened was deliberately concealed. It took nearly 20 years for anyone to face justice. John D. Lee, a militia leader who was present and played a direct role in the killings, was eventually tried and executed at the massacre site in 1877. He faced the firing squad alone, the only person ever convicted. The full degree of leadership involvement, how high up the order went, whether church leadership played a role, has never been fully established to legal satisfaction. Documents from that era remain contested. Survivors and descendants have spent generations seeking acknowledgement. What makes Mountain Meadows uniquely haunting is not just the scale of the violence, it is the betrayal. These were people who believed in the promise of safe passage, who trusted the word of men who had already decided they would not live to see morning. A monument stands at the site today. The words carved into it are simple. They speak of tragedy, of remembrance, of healing. But the question that no monument can answer, the question that echoes across 167 years of silence, is: who gave the final order, and why has the full truth never fully come to light?